So last week I said that I would make a video this weekend. When we make a promise, it's important that we commit to it and follow through. It just occurred to me why I find it so difficult to make these videos. I'm not accustomed to having people listen to me. And when I'm speaking or talking out loud like this, it's very difficult for me to imagine anyone listening to me and engaging with what I'm saying. So forgive me if it comes across as a little shaky or a little stilted. I'm not actually accustomed to having people listen to me. But last week I made a commitment to making a video this week. So here I am, following through on my commitment. I made a script so that I can stay on track. And that should help me to avoid following any tangents that my brain might happen to conjure up during the duration. So a few things happened this week. One of the really exciting things that happened, something that I'm very proud of, was that I planned and facilitated an emotional health and skills workshop for the youth group that I am involved with. And that was done in partnership with another voluntary organisation that provides those kinds of services. And I facilitated it from the brainstorming session through development and then through to execution, and now we're at the feedback stage where we can hopefully learn something from what we've done. I found it very engaging personally. It was something that I'd never done before, so that was one thing that I was very excited to do, and I hope that I can do something and do more like things like that in the future. It was very informative of my own learning and development. I attended my second class in media studies, and I'm finding that more and more engaging and enjoyable, since it touches on some of the things that I'm already interested in, such as how the media influences our behaviour and what we believe, and how we organise and structure ourselves in society and interpret our experiences. So often it seems like the media is kind of leading us through our lives. We're kind of they're interpreting our world for us, and providing us with a kind of a continuous narrative that helps us to sort of not get confused about life, and to help us kind of keep getting up in the mornings and going about our daily lives and going to work and so on. And sometimes it seems like the function of the media is to keep us in a state of credulity as to the status quo, so that we believe that the people in power have everything under control, even if they make a pretense of critiquing the government occasionally or critiquing a business here and there. By and large, the role of the media is to maintain this sense of continuity and systemic integrity, to make us all believe that everything is fine, despite the fact that it isn't, or despite the fact that my life or someone else's life is falling apart. So it helps us to cope with the feeling or the perception of chaos in the world. It's very interesting. Just today I had an epiphany while I was sitting in a cafe about the reason why I avoid relationships and getting entangled in interpersonal stuff is because I have this really kind of strong fear of becoming enmeshed in dysfunctional relationships and getting lost and losing myself in the chaos of other people's emotional dysregulation, and having to compensate for their lack of effectiveness in dealing with their own lives and handling their own emotions and making themselves happy. That was a big part of or that dynamic was a big part of my childhood and adolescence. And I often felt that I was only ever seen or valued in roles where I could be the emotional shock absorber for other people. So my internal narrative of the world is that it's full of these emotionally unstable and hysterical people that can't be trusted or engaged with authentically, and that I have to be constantly on guard and completely self-sufficient and self-contained in order to cope with their dysregulation and that chaos. And this realization has also exposed the reason why I find it difficult to relate to people who are not in crisis. For all of my life, I was conditioned to relate to others using their emotional needs and lack of effectiveness as an entry point to making a connection with them. When I encounter people who are not emotionally needy and who are emotionally stable, that are capable and effective and playful and able to engage with the world effectively, it feels like I'm not useful to them, and they therefore have no way to transact or connect with them in a way that I'm comfortable with or familiar with. It's really about not having a working model of how to relate to people who are capable, self-assured, and emotionally self-regulating. So that's something that I need to work on. That's something that I need to learn. I need to learn how to engage with and relate to people who are self-assured, confident, are interpersonally effective, and who are engaged with the world and fulfilling their goals and living their own lives with their own hobbies and interests. And I need to find a way to connect with people at that level. But it's difficult because I don't have that internal working model. As I've said, it's for my life, for my whole life, my early experiences in life were all about these people who were emotionally dysregulated, constantly in need of attention and emotional consolation, and really extremely preoccupied with their own internal chaos. So there was no room for me. I had to find a way of silencing my authentic self and kind of squashing it down into this small, silent, and unseen space, so that I would have room to contain the chaos of other people. And that became my role. And that's the role that I default to in most of my relationships and interpersonal interactions. And it's exhausting because it feels like there's no possibility of finding a place for myself in relationship with other people, or a place for myself in the world. And so that accounts for my feeling of alienation. So how is my volunteering connected to these discoveries and realizations about myself? Volunteering has helped me to uncover the patterns of how I relate to myself and other people and the world. Within the roles and responsibilities of volunteering, I've been able to work through a lot of my own struggles and to see different capabilities and possibilities for myself that I didn't know were there before. So it's been extremely valuable for me to see relationships and a perspective on the world that's outside of what I would have ordinarily or typically gravitated to. Having that change in perspective has allowed me to see myself from different angles and to encounter myself in different ways and in different capacities and in different roles, so that I can see objectively the parts of myself that are underdeveloped and the parts that are overdeveloped. So one of the final things I want to talk about is how I've been managing my type 1 diabetes. So I recently got an insulin pump, and I had been waiting for an insulin pump for a very long time, for about a year and a half. Because in Ireland, in order to get an insulin pump through the public system, you need to go on a waiting list. And so I was put on a waiting list, I don't even know how long ago. And it is only in the last year or 18 months that I started to finally build up some momentum in that. But halfway through last November, it's now the 3rd of February. So back in November, before Christmas, I got the insulin pump, and it has been really quite a big change. It really has changed a lot for me. I feel like I'm not as stressed. I'm definitely not doing as much work as I used to do with my diabetes. I don't have to monitor my glucose all the time. It's a hybrid closed loop pump, so it monitors my glucose and administers insulin automatically, so I don't have to manage that constantly anymore, and that has been a huge relief. So recently I've been trying to figure out ways of how I can manage my weight, because insulin, when you give more insulin, you tend to put on weight because of the way that it works. Tends to cause you to store fat. If you're consuming a lot of carbohydrate, insulin will store the carbohydrate as fat. So the way to stop that from happening is to consume fewer carbohydrates, and then you take less insulin and therefore you don't store the fat. That's what my strategy is at the moment, that I'm going to try this for the month of February, so I'm quite excited about that. Now, it means that I will need to find alternatives to the bread and the pasta and the rice and potatoes and so on that I normally eat. Now, that's not such a big deal. I already know how to cook vegetables and other things. It's not going to mean that I'll starve. It is a bit of a challenge because avoiding carbohydrates is actually quite difficult. Carbohydrates are everywhere, right? They're even in the vegetables that you don't think they're in. So carbohydrates are actually in more or less everything that we eat, except for a handful of things like meats, water. They're pretty much everywhere. The problem in our contemporary diets is that we have refined carbohydrates. We have products like breakfast cereals, white bread of any kind really, pasta, flour, anything that's made from refined grains is all refined carbohydrate, and those refined carbohydrate provide huge doses of carbs and sugar that spike your insulin. When I eat a large amount of refined carbohydrate, I notice that my blood glucose spikes really, really dramatically, and it takes a long time for it to come back to normal. And this has become, I noticed it long before I had the insulin pump. But now that I have an insulin pump, it kind of makes the pattern much more noticeable and much more actionable in a way. Because when you're using insulin injections and not using an insulin pump, managing diabetes is actually like 50 times more difficult. So when you're constantly chasing blood sugars, it makes it much more difficult for you to think strategically about your diet. And so ever since getting the pump, I have been able to start thinking strategically about my diet and about my overall health. And being in a more strategic frame of mind allows you to see these patterns that you wouldn't normally see if you're stressed out. That's one of the benefits of having an insulin pump. It relieves you of a lot of the day-to-day burdens of having to deal with the ups and downs of glucose, the ups and downs of dealing with carbohydrates, dealing with insulin, and so on. It does it all automatically. A lot of people don't appreciate this about type 1 diabetes. They just see someone who has to inject insulin when they're eating their food. They might wonder, what's the big deal? 99% of the problem, or 99% of the stress associated with type 1 diabetes is due to the ups and downs of glucose levels, because it causes all kinds of secondary problems like mood swings, changes in our ability to concentrate, even differences in physical strength. Like when I have a low blood sugar, I can't lift anything. Sometimes I find it difficult to even walk. And let alone work. Like there's no way I can work when I'm having a low blood sugar. And when I have a high blood sugar, it causes me to become excitable and irritable and reactive. So my mood is much less stable than what you would expect from a 33-year-old male who seems to be otherwise perfectly normal. Type 1 diabetes is a hidden disability. Now, it has taken me a long time to accept that reality, because nobody wants to identify with having a disability, because there's so much stigma attached to having a disability. Type 1 diabetes makes everything that little bit more difficult for me than it would be for someone without diabetes. And it impacts on just about every aspect of my life, like my mental health, my ability to work a job, to remain functional all the time. And it makes me really think about all of the things that other people take for granted that I can't take for granted, such as the ability to work for 6 hours continuously. I can't do that. I have to manage my condition. If I try to work for 6 hours continuously, within that 6-hour period, I would definitely have to manage my blood sugar at some stage throughout that time. I have to take breaks. I have to manage my glucose levels. Despite the assistance of the pump, I still have low blood sugars and I still get high blood sugars, and that makes it more difficult for me to work continuously throughout the day. So that's it for this week. I have 2 goals for February. One is to find a way of relating to people who are competent, who are emotionally stable and self-assured, and who are engaged with their own interests and with the world around them. And number 2 is to find ways of improving my overall health by focusing strategically on my diet. So I'll leave it there, and I'll see you next week.